This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
I can't tell if I'm just becoming numb to a lot of modern wrestling or if I've just lowered my standards so much where the stuff that used to drive me up a wall back in the day, now I just kind of shrug my shoulders at a lot of it. And let's be honest, this past week in wrestling sucked, especially with the news about Punk and Cody's injuries, MJF essentially being written off of television and story. Bryan Danielson has sort of vanished into obscurity. So it's like all the guys that I gave a crap about, all the guys that I wanted to see in a given week, well, they're gone. And now I'm kind of stuck with the leftovers. And I can't get mad at it. I'm obviously upset about the whole Punk and Cody situation, and the MJF story is what it is for the time being. But I watched two shows over the weekend, obviously Rampage and Powerrr, and there was stupid stuff on both shows, more of it coming from AEW, and maybe 5 or 6 months ago when I actually still kind of had hope for that company, I'd have taken them to task for a lot of that dumb stuff, but the bottom line is they're never going to learn, and the people that are currently in charge of that company are never going to learn from their mistakes. They're going to keep pretending like everything's all hunky-dory and that business is great and, oh, look at all the new signings and the fresh faces we're bringing in. Yeah. Sure. New faces, new belts, all this just one giant cloth to try and mask all the other problems they've got going on that they're either failing to address because they're that ignorant and they don't see it, or they're just plain idiots and they don't want to see it. But, of course, when you got every major wrestling media outlet backing you and pretending like everything's all sunshine and rainbows 24/7, why would you think that there's ever anything that needs addressing? It's like mainstream media covering for the current administration's botched policies and botched economy and pretending like everything's perfectly fine when anyone with half a functioning brain can tell you otherwise. But it is what it is. So we're going to go ahead and talk about Rampage and Powerrr this week. Although if you're expecting some grand in-depth reporting, especially with Rampage, you got another thing coming, brother. The effort that goes into the Rampage recaps these days is the same effort that goes into them putting that completely pointless hour of programming together. Before we get to that, though, if it is your first time checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, make sure to subscribe, comment, like the show, and stay posted each Monday and Friday on YouTube and Rumble for new content. We're here each week, and we're one of the few podcasts out there that actually give honest reviews about modern pro wrestling, in addition to our retro content that we cover each week on the Friday shows. Although the classic content, despite its flaws, at least you can look back with fond memories knowing that wrestling used to actually have big stars and big name attractions. Now we have boring, uninspiring characters with little to no redeeming qualities about them. So remember how last week there was actually a couple things of note to talk about with Rampage? Well, this one didn't have much of that. But the offer's still on the table, Tony. If you would like recommendations on ways to actually make Rampage a better show each week, I would be more than happy to spitball some ideas for you. But until then, you just go ahead and keep on booking lackluster versions of WWF Heat. Opening match was Eddie Kingston versus Jake Hager. And if you can name me the last time Jake Hager had a singles match in this company without looking it up on the web right now, I will personally write you a check for $1,000. I mean, there's something to be said about roster rotation, but there's also something to be said about guys that have not been featured for so long. When you do see them actually wrestle on TV, your first thought is, wait, that guy is still employed? And yes, I know Hager was part of that garbage-ass arena brawl from the pay-per-view with the Jericho Appreciation Crew, but he was also a guy amongst a sea of 20 other guys, and it's not like he stood out in any capacity in that kind of environment. Like, be honest. When's the last time you actually saw them devote a segment of their show to actually focusing on Jake Hager? Just strictly focusing on him in any kind of story capacity. I can't even remember, it's been so long. I mean, it was definitely the best wrestling match on this given show. Hager's definitely trimmed off some body fat. I mean, guy only works 4 matches in a given year, so he's got plenty of time to hit the gym and shred. So I'm not totally surprised to see the conditioning that guy's in. Most of what they did was standard hard-hitting street fight style, and I didn't really have a problem with that. I had a problem with the constant brawling on the floor, but we've been over that a million times with AEW matches. It's just kind of a thing everyone does, and I guess we're supposed to overlook it. I did like Taz's line in here where he was plugging the Jericho-Ortiz hair versus hair match for Dynamite. He says, and I quote, "That match would be money." Yes, Taz. In fact, it would be money. It would have been even more money if they'd have, put it on a pay-per-view and actually made people pay to see it. Kind of like how they used to do hair matches in wrestling. Anyway, Kingston won with the spinning back fist. Really nothing else to it. Solid TV match. They didn't do anything to expose the business, and while I've definitely soured on Kingston in the last 5 or 6 months, at least him and Hager look like 2 grown-ass men that I can buy having a legit fight. So guess what we got this week? A Jay Lethal match. Well, kind of. Jay Lethal was involved, but so was Satnam Singh. Yes, that Satnam Singh. Great Khali 2.0. Speaking of guys that you wonder whether or not they're still under contract. Well, the time has finally come to see whether this guy actually has any form of athletic skill as a pro wrestler, or if he ends up being AEW's version of Omos. And based on what they did here, I'm honestly not really sure how to conclude it. It was strategically short, and Singh did most of the work with beating up the 2 job guys until Lethal came in and got the pin at the end. If you're somebody that actually enjoys watching Jay Lethal work and you would like to see him actually do stuff, well, you weren't getting it in this match, aside from the lethal injection at the end. I don't really know what the point of this was, other than to throw Singh out there in a sink or swim segment. I still have no idea why he's there, other than because a bunch of corporate TV execs love diversity. Even if the guy is talentless and has nothing to offer the wrestling business, god damn it, he's not white. And that's all that matters. Put him out there. Red Velvet wrestled Chris Statlander. Miro's still pissed at God. And the main event is FTR and Trent Beretta versus Will Ospreay and friends. And who are Ospreay's friends? I don't know. I don't care. And they'll probably be gone by the time the Forbidden Door pay-per-view is over, so it's not even worth harping on. There was a mixture of good and bad here. It took me a minute to get over my seething rage of having to watch FTR team with a guy who spent the better part of 3 years in one of the worst comedy acts in AEW. But when you remove him from that equation and you just watch Trent be a normal guy that can wrestle well, imagine that. He's a lot more tolerable to watch on TV. The action was fine for the most part. It did completely break down into the usual AEW nonsense at the end where Everyone's just doing fuck all and running in and out of the ring without tags, hitting big moves, the whole 9 yards. And I like Paul Turner, but, he's still just as incompetent as every other AEW official. There was some choppiness with Ospreay working with Dax and Cash early on. I'm not saying it was a styles clash necessarily, but their stuff wasn't smooth. Let's just leave it at that. I've been very hit and miss with a lot of Ospreay's work in New Japan. I'm not entirely sold on the guy like a lot of avid wrestling watchers are these days, but he's done some good stuff before. Him and Okada had a really good G1 match a few years ago, from what I remember. It was kind of odd to see them put the baby faces over here, and I'm not exactly sure how Ospreay fits into the whole Forbidden Door equation right now, and especially when he just lost in his first AEW showcase. But again, we're also implying that they really have anything intriguing for this Forbidden Door show anyway, aside from, let's just throw together a bunch of B-level AEW New Japan Dream matches with no rhyme or reason. And people will buy it. By the way, when is that pay-per-view coming up? Isn't it like 2 weeks out from now? Does anyone know what the hell they're even doing for that show right now, aside from Jon Moxley wrestling a New Japan guy to become the interim AEW World Champion? Possibly Adam Page versus Okada, even though that match hasn't been set in stone yet. This is the big AEW New Japan Dream pay-per-view that everyone's been raving about and beating themselves off over for the better part of 3 years. I mean, I know I'm a jaded, cynical wrestling fan as it is, but my God, dude, come on. Even if you're a diehard fan of both products, you've got to admit the build of the show is fucking abysmal. It'd be great if they actually dedicated an entire episode of Rampage to showing some video packages or some highlights of some of these New Japan guys to possibly give me something to care about for the show. Give me some backstory of what these guys are about. Some idea of who they are, what their styles are, what their beef is with whoever they're going to be feuding with. Nah, instead I'm being subjected to a Red Velvet Chris Statlander match and Satnam Singh doing lumbering big guy matches for 60 whole seconds. Oh, but how could I forget? Tony Khan knows what he's doing. Clearly. So anyway, there's your weekly less than inspiring AEW Rampage report, but we're going to move on to NWA Powerrr. This would be Season 8, Episode 11. And this actually was a legit episode. This wasn't one of those Power Surge deals right before one of their big pay-per-views. Before we get going with the actual show, let me just throw this out there briefly. I do plan on covering the Alwayz Ready event. Unfortunately, I did not have any time on Sunday to watch the show or take notes, so I'm going to have to put that one off until next week's Monday's episode, which is fine, because we've already dedicated the NWA talk for the Monday show anyway, and in factoring in that there isn't another pay-per-view with AEW or WWE next week, that'll give me some time to run down the show and dive into whatever new content they've got going on with their next season of Powerrr. If they even have a next set of tapings filmed yet, I really don't know. Anyway, we begin this week with the self-proclaimed best-selling author, Tyrus, in the ring for a promo. And what we had here was classic heel pro wrestling at its finest. Now, of course, because Tyrus has many fans that are looking to get autographed copies of his book, Just Tyrus, there was no way that everyone was going to be able to get a copy. Unfortunately, they sold out early on. And by the way, for my own amusement, I checked this for the record. This is a legitimate autobiography. He is not ribbing with this. But there was one young gentleman that waited all day in line to get a copy of his own, and Tyrus is a nice guy, and he just so happened to save a copy for this young lad. So he brought Kyle Davis down to ringside to meet him, and he was about to give him a version of the book, but it's going to come with a price. A $1,000 fee. But the youngling did learn a valuable lesson on this day. Make sure you pocket $1,000 for safekeeping, especially if you want autograph content from celebrities. I mean, the boy should have known better. Come on now. Anyway, the more important takeaway from this segment is that Tyrus has issued an open slam challenge. Because as we all know, having watched this program in recent weeks, we all know that Tyrus is yet to be legitimately slammed in the Tyrus Slam Challenge. And we turn to Kyle Davis, who was about to say something really stupid and something that he would gravely regret. But Tyrus responds with, "Watch your mouth, Kyle." And there's a single fan in the crowd that yells, "Don't do it, Kyle." Think about your wife and kids. Now, we all know that Mims did not legitimately slam Tyrus. It was a ruse. So tonight, Tyrus is bringing an international 7-time world powerlifting champion, a distant relative of Andre the Giant, apparently. And if this jabroni just so happens to pull out the miracle of a lifetime and slam the big guy, he will become the new world's television champion. So I think we clearly established in this segment, in terms of ranking the top heels in today's business, it goes MJF at the top, then Tyrus, then everybody else that cosplays as heels, even though nobody actually gets legitimate heel heat anymore. Anyway, we'll get to more of this later on. First match for the show was Nick Aldis versus Brian Myers. I believe the former Kurt Hawkins, also a good friend of Matt Cardona. And once we got past the completely pointless jumpstart brawl, match was perfectly fine. I did get a kick out of Aldis throwing Myers into the ring to start the match, and as soon as Aldis gave the signal for the timekeeper to ring the bell, he did. Yes, apparently there is an unwritten rule in modern wrestling where the wrestlers are allowed to call for the opening bell in their matches, not the ring officials. But they work well together. There's not a whole lot of intricate detail to note about what they did. Aldis won with the cloverleaf, and then we get the immediate interview afterwards where Aldis pretty much lets everyone know that he's more than likely going to win the NWA World's title back through nefarious means. Says he's done taking the high road, and he'll do whatever it takes to become the real world's champion again. And they did put a graphic up on screen during the match where Cardona was quoted as saying, regardless of his injury status, he is going to be at the Alwayz Ready pay-per-view. So they were really pushing here that the Aldis Cardona title match is going to happen. Again, I don't know to what extent Cardona's injured right now, but if he's healthy enough to work, even if he ends up having to drop the strap to Aldis in the short term, may not be a bad call. So then we had the Tyrus Slam Challenge, and the massive star that they found that apparently flew to the States for this epic challenge, the alleged powerlifting world champion and distant relative of Andre the Giant. It's some guy named KC Rocks, who looked like every indie outlaw guy in the book. The shitty haircut, the pasty white look, the spaghetti arms, the whole shebang. So, long story short, Rocks ended up kicking Tyrus in the groin for the DQ, and then Tyrus killed him. That promptly led to Mims coming out to get into a standoff with Tyrus. They kind of went back and forth momentarily with Mims running wild, but then Tyrus ended up laying him out with a flatliner. And then Scion ran down, teased that he was going to get into an altercation with Tyrus, but then swerve. He turns around and decks Mims with the Death Valley driver, and he puts the boot, or they both put the boots to him. And I'll say this, at least we finally got some clarification on what the fuck Scion's character is supposed to be. It would appear that he's full-fledged heel now, and he has aligned himself with Tyrus and Idolmania Sports Management. Which makes sense. Kind of figured they were going in this direction with him, considering how he's been towing the line of working like a heel in most of his matches, but at least now we have a definitive answer to it. So, don't have much of an opinion on it right now, but we'll see how they book it. and obviously skipping through all the infomercials that they have throughout the show. That brought us to the main event. Missa Kate and Kylan King versus Kenzie Page and Camille. God almighty, can we get any more fucking K sounds going there? Normally I'd have probably glossed over this match entirely, but I mean, Camille's involved with it, and it at least gave me something to latch onto. Generally, I would say the match was passable per women's standards. Missa Kate was actually healing it up pretty well in this match. Not totally sure if I dig the pajama pants vibe she had going on there, but whatever. The whole thing was mostly to set up Kylan King and Camille for their pay-per-view match, which they already kind of established after that number one contenders three-way they did a few weeks back. I don't expect Kylan to beat Camille for the belt, but she's got a solid look. I think she actually has a few inches over Camille too, so there's definitely more of a credibility factor there in comparison to a lot of other girls on the roster. I don't know how good the match will be, but I guess we'll find out when we see it go down. Honestly, that's all I really have to say about the main event. The finish looks sloppy, but girls worked hard. They actually try to be characters and play to the crowd. You know, their stuff doesn't always look the cleanest, but at least it looks like something actually pertaining to pro wrestling. I definitely prefer watching NWA's women's division over AEW's women's division. It's for damn sure. Probably wouldn't say it's on WWE's level, but I mean, if I'm stacking them up in a tier, it's like WWE's women's division at the top, followed by NWA and AEW and whatever the fuck they're doing there. Of the three Oak Grove shows we've seen thus far, this is definitely the weakest of the bunch. Tyrus was awesome, and to be honest, I know he's a controversial figure in the wrestling world, but the guy's an effective heel. He works his character to perfection, and I actually buy that the guy's a legitimate asshole. I mean, if the guy could work a lick, I'd contemplate putting the world title on him for a short period of time just to try and build up some babyface challengers in the main event scene. But I will definitely concede that Tyrus is not Ric Flair or Harley Race in the ring. So I can understand why you might not get that excited about the idea of pushing the guy to that level. And as I noted before, I'll cover the Alwayz Ready show next week once I get a little more free time to sit down and actually watch it. It may be a short review, it may not be. It all depends on what they have booked and how much is worth talking about. Like I said, I mean, if it's going to be like a full 7 or 8 match card, the only thing I knew about it going in was that women's title match, which doesn't look all that enticing on paper. And if they are going to go through the Cardona Aldis match, great, but considering Cardona's condition going in, I don't know how good the match is going to be. So it might just kind of be one of those brief Cliff's Notes recaps, and then we just kind of move on from it, which is probably not a bad thing, if we're being quite honest. But stay posted for this coming Friday when we dive back into the classic content, and we also see what Dynamite has in store for us. And without actual stars like Punk or Danielson or MJF, I'm sure the show will suck mass cock like it did last week. Who knows, maybe without the aforementioned names, it'll give Tony an excuse to actually start booking FTR like they fucking matter. Or maybe not. You know, maybe he'll just keep him at low-level status while he keeps the tag belts on the Jungle Book crew, because, you know, those guys are really putting asses in seats and selling tickets. Anyway, that'll do it for this one. Take care, all. We'll be back on Friday. Peace out.